It is stated in the Orkhon inscriptions that there cannot be an immoral state or community. Customs, on the other hand, is a name given to a set of unwritten rules. Customs are not limited to determining the norms of social life. There is also a custom in the military. Obedience to orders plays an important role in military customs. Today, however, these rules have softened a little. However, disobedience did not go unpunished. The Russian army is about to go down in the history of world wars on disobedience. In this video, we will talk about the high-ranking admiral who was dismissed for disobeying Putin's orders. Let's dive into the details of this scandalous news in the Russian army rank chain. The commander of Russia's Pacific Fleet was dismissed a week after the surprise inspection. The change was announced a week after the Russian Pacific Fleet was ordered to conduct surprise combat exercises to repel a theoretical enemy landing. A senior Russian Navy commander has refused to send any more of his men to war in Ukraine. Thereupon, it was claimed that the admiral was fired by Vladimir Putin. Admiral Sergei Avakyants, 66, was the commander of Russia's Pacific Fleet before his sudden dismissal from his post last week. Russia's Pacific Fleet, stationed in the port of Vladivostok, did not comment on the reshuffle. Avakyants was appointed commander of Russia's Pacific Fleet in May 2012. He was awarded the rank of military admiral on December 13, 2014. Avakyants was awarded medals for his service in the Russian army. When Avakyants received marching orders from the Kremlin, he was participating in war games involving nuclear bombers. But a Russian Defense Ministry source insisted that the admiral had decided to retire after a long and distinguished career. The source tried to downplay the significance of the admiral's dismissal. Putin's envoy, Yuri Tritnev, stated that 65-year-old Admiral Sergei Avakyants was appointed head of a group responsible for military sports education and patriotic education. These training centers are planned to be opened in 11 regions of Russia and Donetsk, which was illegally annexed from Ukraine. The centers are scheduled to open in May, and at least 9,000 people are expected to arrive throughout the year. The centers will educate people aged 14 to 35, including school children and students. In addition, the allegations about why the Russian admiral was fired are quite diverse. One of the allegations is related to the Da disaster. A group of elite Marines from the Pacific Fleet nearly perished in an attempt to take Viola Da. That's why the admiral was disappointed about the Kremlin's war in Ukraine. For this eastern Ukrainian town, the Russians suffered high casualty rates. The Russian army lost more than 100 military equipment, including 36 tanks, in just 3 days. The 55th Guards, Marine Corps Brigade, and the 40th Marine Corps Brigade of the Pacific Fleet were particularly affected by the conflict and lost almost all of their soldiers. Sergei Avakyants refused to send any more of his trained officers into the war, opposing the orders of the Russian leader. The admiral was dismissed. Another claim about the admiral's dismissal concerns his success in the exercises. Moscow held exercises as a show of strength amid tensions with the West due to conflicts in Ukraine. The Russian army concentrated the bulk of its forces on the front lines in Ukraine. However, the Russian army continued to conduct regular exercises across Russia to train its forces and demonstrate their readiness. Last week, the entire Russian Pacific Fleet was placed on high alert for impromptu exercises that would involve missile launches. More than 25,000 soldiers, 89 aircraft, and 12 submarines participated in the exercise on April 14. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu stated that the purpose of war games is to test the ability of the Russian armed forces to respond to aggression. Sergei Shoigu stated that in addition to the naval aviation of the Pacific Fleet, nuclear-capable strategic bombers and other warplanes will also participate in the exercises. The Russian Ministry of Defense announced that the Southern Sea of Okhotsk, the Peter the Great Bay and the Sea of Japan, and the Avacha Bay on the southeast coast of the Kamchatka Peninsula will be closed to sea and air traffic for a while. Russian Deputy Defense Minister Alexander Fomin informed foreign military attaches about out the exercises. Follman stressed that these were intended to test the readiness of the Pacific Fleet to repel aggression. The Russian ministry described the briefing as a demonstration of Russia's voluntary transparency. In addition, the Russian Ministry of Defense has released videos showing warships and submarines departing to participate in maneuvers. As part of the exercises, Russian naval units deployed on amphibious landing craft and coastal defense missile systems moved to firing positions. On the other hand, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov described the war games as part of regular training aimed at maintaining the necessary level of readiness of the armed forces. Sergei Shoigu noted that the maneuvers scenario foresees a response to an enemy's attempt to land on Sakhalin Island and the southern Kuril Islands. Japan claims territorial rights over the Kuril Islands, which it calls the Northern Territories. The Soviet Union gave them to World War II. It took the last few days of World War II, and the conflict prevented the countries from signing a peace treaty that officially ended their hostilities. Last year, Russia announced that it was suspending peace talks with Japan to protest Tokyo's sanctions against Moscow for its actions in Ukraine. Russia has increased its military presence on the islands in recent years. It deployed advanced warplanes, anti-ship missiles, and air defense systems. In short, Russia is trying to do its best to hold on in other regions while fighting for life and death on the territory of Ukraine. In another development, new allegations are emerging that Russia has a program to sabotage wind farms and communication cables in the North Sea. The allegations come amid rising tensions between Russia and Western nations following the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the Nord Stream pipeline explosion. The investigation is jointly conducted by public broadcasters in Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. Public broadcasters claim that Russia has a fleet of ships disguised as fishing boats in the North Sea and research vessels carrying underwater surveillance equipment to map key areas for possible sabotage. These allegations focus on a Russian ship called the Admiral Vladimirsky, believed to be a spy ship disguised as the Expeditionary Oceanographic ship. Also, data on this issue raises concerns about hostile activity against maritime infrastructure and communications cables, including a major incident in the Shetland Islands last year when a cable was cut and severely hampered communications with the mainland. The documentary uses an unknown former UK Royal Navy expert to track the ship's movements around 7 wind farms off the UK and Dutch coasts on a single mission. Western countries are carrying out similar activities against Russia for the exploration of sensitive areas, with the intention of having few options in case the war in Ukraine escalates. As a result, the turmoil in the Russian army never ends. The wrong decisions taken in the war in Ukraine are blamed on top commanders. Russian commanders are quickly dismissed from their posts due to failure or disobedience. Considering that the war continues, it's only a matter of time before these situations occur again in the Russian army. How do you think the dismissal of top commanders could affect the Ukrainian war? The war between Ukraine and Russia severely connected the fateful partnerships of the Eastern European bloc. The endangerment of Russia's borders with Eastern Europe and the later spread of the war to much wider areas, especially worried NATO member states. Moscow's invasion plan strengthened Poland's relations with Kiev, one of Ukraine's most important allies and neighbors. Poland is now trying to warn the wider world of the danger posed by Putin's Russia. This is not just a regional clash. Russia's war against Ukraine is a potential source of global fire. Polish President Andrzej Duda is very sensitive on this issue and does not hesitate to constantly state that he is completely against Russia and that they will continue to stand by Ukraine. The war in Ukraine has become a sudden impetus for the militarization and rearmament of the countries of the world. Poland is taking drastic measures to prevent Russian aggression and threats in Europe. Poland has sworn to build the largest army in Europe. It is preparing an army and an armored unit for this. Polish Defense Minister Mariusz Błaszczak announced plans to increase the country's army from 150,000 to 300,000 due to Russian aggression. Błaszczak stated that within 2 years the Polish army would become the strongest in Europe. Błaszczak added that Poland will soon receive dozens of US-made Abrams tanks. The government ordered 116 old M1A1 Abrams as a temporary measure to replace tanks shipped to Ukraine. The minister stated that US M1 Abrams tanks will join the 18th Mechanized Division stationed in eastern Poland. So far, the first batch of M1A1 tanks has arrived in Poland. In addition, the Polish army will have added all 250 M1A2 SEP-V3 tanks to its inventory in a few years. This tank army of Poland is supported by hundreds of 4th-generation K2 Panther tanks and K9 howitzers and Polish Borsuk armored vehicles. Dozens of HIMARS and Patriot systems also support the Polish military. Poland received 32 Farads 35 fighter jets and at least 6 F-22 fighter jets from the USA. 96 RH-64 Apache helicopters purchased from the USA and 48 Fa-50 warplanes currently ordered from South Korea will provide strong air support to Poland. Militarization in eastern and northern Poland shows the strength of the alliance to Russia. The huge Polish army stationed at military bases near Kaliningrad and the Belarusian borders worries Putin deeply. While Poland sends a direct pushback to Russia with military measures, it also warns Russia with heavy sanctions. Poland is also very brave in the sanctions decisions taken against Russia. In fact, we saw the latest example of Poland's harsh stance on this issue much more clearly in the 11th package of sanctions planned to be held against Russia. Recently, Poland and the Baltic states are pushing for sanctions against Russia's nuclear power industry. The Warsaw government has called for Russian nuclear energy issues to be included in the European Union's 11th sanctions package. With this attitude, Poland almost warned the Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, for the last time to give up this war because economic sanctions are one of the most important factors slowing down the Russians in this war. The EU's 11th sanctions package also seems to have a serious impact on Russia. The reason for this is that the sanctions package will contain heavy conditions. The relevant proposals in the text of the sanctions were presented in a document for EU countries. It touches upon measures against the Russian company Rosatom, including individual sanctions against the Russian administration, bans on new contracts, a ban on investment in Russia's nuclear sector, and a ban on imports of Russian-enriched uranium. The 4 countries that have long advocated sanctions against Rosatom have proposed some exceptions and transition periods this time. For example, the termination of cooperation with Rosatom will be gradual and will not last more than 2 years. Hungary will be given a 9-year transitional period to complete the construction of the Pac's nuclear power plant using Russian technology. The authors of the document state that some EU countries have already refused to cooperate with Russia in the nuclear field, citing the Czech Republic and Finland as an example. However, the necessity of obtaining the approval from the entire EU in order to impose sanctions on this area raises serious doubts. On the other hand, it should be noted that Hungary, France, and Bulgaria, which are highly dependent on Russian technology, have already expressed their opposition to the proposal. Brussels, on the other hand, believes that the 11th package of sanctions is aimed not at expanding the list of areas of the Russian economy that are subject to sanctions, but at preventing the already imposed restrictions from being circumvented. It should be noted that EU countries have previously discussed the inclusion of Rosatom in the 10th package of sanctions imposed on the Russian Federation. Lithuania and Poland insisted on this, but Hungary and Bulgaria blocked the proposal for sanctions against Russia. Ukraine has proposed to use its presence at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant as a basis for imposing restrictions on the Russian state company. However, the restriction decision against Rosatom was not included in the 10th package of sanctions, as countries such as Hungary and Bulgaria refused. Arvydas Anušauskas, head of the Lithuanian Ministry of Defense, stated in an interview with Guildhall that the argument for sanctioning Rosatom was that this concern would produce nuclear weapons. Earlier, a member of the European Parliament from France, Raphael Glucksmann, chairman of the Special Committee on Foreign Intervention, reported that the entire military-industrial complex of the Russian Federation, of which Rosatom is also a part, should be under sanctions restrictions. The country that acted most courageously in this regard was Poland. Currently, the Warsaw government, since the beginning of the war, opposes the Russian occupation of Ukraine and supports economic sanctions against Moscow. Poland is literally leading the European response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as Europe found itself facing the continent's biggest armed clash since World War II. These efforts by the Polish leadership were seriously unique. Also, Poland's leading role in the European response to Putin's invasion reflects the country's extensive experience of Russian imperialism in both its Tsarist and Soviet forms. Since Poland's accession to the European Union in 2004, politicians in Warsaw have warned Europe of the growing threat posed by a resurgent and revisionist Russia. In addition, Poles were particularly concerned by signs of deepening ties between Berlin and Moscow and vocally opposed the German partnership in Russia's Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline. Polish politicians have warned of this strategic energy infrastructure project that the second pipeline will allow Putin to bypass Ukraine's gas transit system and leave the whole of Europe vulnerable to Russian energy blackmail while subjecting the country to a full-scale invasion. Germany chose to ignore these warnings until the eve of Russia's February 2022 offensive. Moreover, Poland's prominent role in European security policy today is not entirely new. Since joining NATO in 1999, Poland has become a security element on the alliance's eastern flank. This was made possible thanks to Poland's strategic location and its extraordinary economic growth, which helped finance the rapid modernization and expansion of the country's armed forces. The Polish army, on the other hand, is currently shown as one of the most powerful armies in the world. Poland has in many ways set the standard for European humanitarian intervention in the Russian offensive against Ukraine since the invasion began. Poland has accepted more Ukrainian refugees than any other European country, while also providing a range of benefits such as access to health and education as well as employment opportunities. Over the past year, Polish authorities registered more than 1.5 million Ukrainian refugees. Poland is also one of the leading contributors of military aid to Ukraine at per capita rates. Poland sent more military aid to Ukraine than almost any other country except the Baltic states. This aid included hundreds of tanks and other important weapons. Poland plays a vital role in the logistical effort to deliver international military aid to Ukraine, enabling a global coalition of countries to supply the Ukrainian army with the weapons, equipment, and ammunition it needs. Most recently, the Warsaw government has decided to send 4 MiG fighter jets to the Ukrainian army, making it the first NATO country to send aircraft to Ukraine after Russia invaded Ukraine last year. Meanwhile, the Polish leadership continues to help fill the geopolitical vacuum created by the waning influence of Europe's traditionally dominant foreign policy powers. The Polish leadership of Europe's response to Putin's invasion also forges unprecedented ties between the Polish and Ukrainian people. These two nations have suffered from quarrels and historical conflicts in the past. However, they now find themselves united by the existential threat from today's Russia. Ukrainian opinion polls regularly show Poland as the country's closest partner, while the Kremlin cynically conceals its genocidal invasion of Ukraine with a language of Slavic brotherhood. It is Ukraine's Slavic neighbors in Poland who truly show fraternal support. This will shape the future geopolitical landscape of the region. When Russia is defeated, Ukraine will likely deepen its partnership with Poland to form a strong bloc in European politics. Together, the two nations will have an authoritative voice in the wider democratic world. In short, Europe's geopolitical center of gravity is shifting eastward, and Poland takes the lead. British intelligence issued a warning that the Russians will likely break their usual pattern of strikes in an effort to undermine the morale of the Ukrainian population over the New Year holiday period. And as it turned out, they were totally right. Around 3 hours later, the sirens went off across the whole of Ukraine because the Russians indeed had launched their missiles. This time, the Russians primarily launched Caliber rockets from the warships in the Black Sea, and they also tapped into the Rostok and Astrakhan near the Caspian Sea. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that the Russians carried out a total of about 20 rocket launches. However, looking at the videos of launches and traces, one can count more than 20 rockets. And this is where it gets interesting once again. The reason why only 20 rockets entered the territory of Ukraine is simple. Russian air defense seems to have shot down several rockets. Once again today, shortly after the rockets were launched from Astrakhan. The footage was released of how one rocket fell in the Volgograd region. The footage captured only burning gray fragments of the rockets. Given that no explosions were reported and that there is no shell crater on the ground, it means that the rocket was intercepted by Russian air defense and its remnants fell on the ground without explosion. A similar situation seems to have happened in Crimea. Here, the footage also captures how Russian air defense starts intercepting some objects. Some sources claim that the Russian air defense is actually intercepting Ukrainian drones. There is a theory that the Ukrainians are launching their massive drone attacks simultaneously with Russian strikes in order to confuse the air defense system. However, even though at first glance it seems like a smart move, there are a lot of problems associated with implementation of this plan. Firstly, the Ukrainians need to know exactly from which base the Russians decided to launch their rockets this time. And as you might have noticed, there is some sort of rotation process between the launch places, and they use a different combination of places each time. Secondly, the drones are much slower. So in order to time it perfectly, the Ukrainians would need to know not only the exact place, but also the exact time for which the launch has been planned. Thirdly, the operational altitude and speed differences are still large enough to tell the difference between the missiles and drones. Lastly, when the Ukrainians hit Crimea with drones, there was usually footage featuring them, which is quite easy to tell because they allowed. So for these reasons, I'm inclined to think that there was no simultaneous massive Ukrainian drone attack and that the Russians just have some internal problems with their air defense system. In the meantime, some Ukrainian officials are also teasing the Russians with predictions that Moscow will spend the new year in the dark after the Ukrainians struck the Russian strategic airfield in the deep Russian rear 2 times. The Kremlin decided to take no chances. The Russians are reportedly boosting their air defense around Moscow and have already deployed around 2,000 people just to monitor the sky during the new year. The Russians have several circles of air defense around Moscow, which they recently reinforced even more. First of all, such a high level of alertness might partially explain why the Russians are shooting down everything moving in the sky, including their own rockets. But apart from that, such a high concentration of air defense around Moscow inevitably means that Russian air defense has been compromised somewhere else. The paranoia over the security of Moscow may open the door for a lot of other opportunities for the Ukrainians, so we will see whether these opportunities will be identified and exploited. So what do you guys think about this issue? Please express your thoughts in the comments. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications in order to be informed about new videos. Thank you for watching us.